We are doing a core session, so it is part of a series, and you can get a certification if you fill out the form and start keeping track of all the core sessions you go throughout NACM. On the app, there is a PDF that you can fill out and send in, or there's a sign-in sheet in the back. So you can do either way if you want credit, and I'll explain what core is briefly. Go from there. I'm Dana Bartocci. I am looking for the clicker. There we go. I am the Human Resources and Development Director for the Minnesota Judicial Branch. We have roughly 3,000 employees, 300 judicial officers, and are a unified system. I took this job March 16th, 2020, so I've learned a lot really quickly from that day, as many of you have as well. Rob.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I am Rob Martin. I am the Senior Human Resources and Development Manager, which is in Minnesota. It's in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the 4th Judicial District. It's serving Hennepin County, so we are one of the districts that has only one county because we're an urban court. And then throughout the other parts of Minnesota, we have 10 other judicial districts, including our State Court Administrator's office where Dana works. So I've been in my role for 21 years. I've been in the branch for 21 years. I have not been in my role for 21 years. In my role for 5. And again, I'm happy and excited to be here for the second session today. And welcome, and everyone, thank you for coming.
So NACM Core, most of you were in the last session, but some of you and maybe those online viewers weren't, so I'm going to give a short version of what the NACM Core is. NACM Core is education for today's court managers, really keeping it up to date. What do we need? How do we do it? Keeping up with the times and making sure we have what we need. This is part of the workforce management core curriculum, talking about performance management. The last session, we did a broad topic that hit all the different steps of workforce planning and workforce management. This session, we're going to take just one of those in the list, performance management, and dig deep into that one. So the NACM Core really is there to have excellence in administration and justice. And without us, the excellence in administration and justice isn't there. And last time I made a connection to the fall of society as we know it if we don't have great courts, and so the core can really help us there. But you know, that might be a little too much, but I really think by keeping all of us aware and up to date in everything, we have the courts that we need for society to function. And that's a huge burden on us, but also a huge responsibility and a huge honor that we are part of the judicial branch of government wherever you are at. So NACM Core is there to help us all fulfill that really big responsibility. The other thing about NACM Core is that all of these are for managers, that workforce management is for managers, not just HR folks. And case flow and workflow is for me as an HR person, as well as managers. It's all of the folks in an organization that makes it run. All of the managers need to be familiar with all of the different things. I don't need to know all the details of case flow, but that's what our employees do. I need to know. So we're going to talk about the annual performance review process. There's already a yawn, I know. Who loves doing annual reviews? Yeah, no one. Including me, I procrastinate to the last day to get mine done, so I also don't love them. But we're going to talk about how to eliminate and mitigate some of the bias we have in review processes. And then also, how do we make sure our reviews are consistent across all of our employees? We're going to use a method called calibration, and you'll try that at the end. We're going to talk specifically about performance reviews, getting rid of bias, and how we do them to make them easier and to make them more efficient and effective. Because nobody loves performance reviews. How can we do it in that way where they're efficient and effective?
All right. Well, we're going to start with going over just what is a performance eval, what's the purpose of them, get a little foundation going before we get into the end here. So, all right. So what is the purpose of a performance evaluation? So we as leaders have that responsibility to keep our employees aligned with our mission, vision, and values and moving them towards our goals in our whatever district or whatever court we're in. And as well, like really cultivating that growth-minded mindset, right? So having them always learning, always wanting to be involved in stuff, like Dana talked about in our last session, having them volunteer for things that aren't part of their job, right? Getting them engaged. So that's also part of the purpose of a performance evaluation. It's ongoing. A performance evaluation shouldn't just be one time a year we sit down and talk about your performance. Performance evaluations should be going all the time. They include things like, if you have monthly one-to-ones, weekly one-to-ones, quick touch bases, goal updates, all of those different things should be documented and added to your performance evaluation so that it's not a surprise to the employee at that point in time. We really stress that so much that whatever is written on a performance eval really shouldn't surprise the employee. They don't have to agree with it. They can be surprised that it's on there, but they shouldn't really be surprised that there's something on there that they haven't heard about throughout the year. And then just kind of looking at what are the different types of performance evaluation. So all of you out there will probably use a different type of performance evaluation. There's the behavioral anchor rating system, which is also called BARS. That's where you have maybe a list of competencies. And in those competencies, there's a list of behaviors that make up, the rating system, right? And we're going to talk about that more because that's what we use in the Minnesota Judicial Branch. There's also the management by objectives. And so that's where you're really sitting down with your employee and you're collectively agreeing on goals that are going to reach that overall mission, vision, and value of your court. So what are the goals of your court and how can each individual employee strive to meet those goals by the end of the year? There's also the 360-degree feedback. So if any of you have participated in that, it's a pretty hefty anonymous survey that really gets feedback from peers in a non-open-ended way. The piece that I've always done, it's done by a professional service. It's a lot of not open-ended questions, but a rating scale. Those get computed by the company and given to a professional coach. So somebody who's certified to read and give those examples back to them. And then it's a more meaningful way of looking at your performance over the years and what where you're losing people, where you're being really successful, ways that you can grow, what are those gaps? So that's another way to do that. And then also there's what is probably the easiest one is just that rating scale, right? So maybe some of you have different ways of calculating the job, right? So it might be like accountability and quality. And I'm going to rate you from 1 to 5, right? Of not successful up to exceeds expectations. And there's 5 points within that, right? And then you also just maybe write a little bit of a narrative of how they've done and why you rated them that way. So that's where it's similar to the behavioral anchor model, except you're actually using the behavioral anchors, you're actually using common language versus a rating scale where you're just putting down, here's where I'm ranking you, here's why, here's your score. So wanted to make sure we go over some of those basic types and just to give you a quick example of what those look like. So we're going to do a quick introductory activity here. So I know it says groups of 4 on the screen, but we want to do a COVID-friendly activity. So I'm leaving it up to you. And we do want you to try to meet with a partner at least. And if you want to do a group, that's okay. But within your groups, for the next 15 minutes, just get to know what other people do. So find somebody that you maybe don't work with and talk about what your court does in their evaluation system. So what does it look like in your court? How are they similar? How are they different? Some different things you can learn. So I'll give it off to you, and we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes to go through that. So hopefully you had a good discussion with some people that you didn't already know. And what we're going to do now is look for a couple of people that can tell us what piqued their curiosity or what they want to know more about that they learned from someone else. I could get any volunteers? Looking to see if anyone would share what they heard that would pique their curiosity to learn more.
So Team Texas learned from Team Reno, Nevada about a thing called Sweet Process that is a web-based program that, so new clerks that come in, like if they want to know how to file a new divorce and what the processes are, it's all in there. And it sounds really interesting.
It just walks you through step by step. If your whole staff called out and you hadn't done court in a while, you could follow this and do court all day long.
Excellent.
Or process payments or file a complaint. Sweet process.
Sweet process.
Sweet process.
Right.
What's that? It's web-based. Hold on, we'll try to get more info for you.
Awesome. All right. Then we got our second volunteer up here in the green.
Hi there, I'm May. In addition to annual performance reviews, we incorporate, I guess I should say, my team is a highly communicative group of application developers in the IT department, and so we incorporate peer review and peer feedback into our reviews, and we find it's overwhelmingly positive. But we're also looking to incorporate some sort of element of anonymity down the road. I'm not sure quite how to do that. I'm not sure if that's a recommendation that will come from this group, but it's something we're also exploring.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, if we get extra time, we can definitely hit on that topic as well. Yes.
I think I'd like to share two things. When I first started at one of the courts I work at now, everybody complained about the annual evaluations and everything, and the questions weren't fair that were being asked and everything. So we formed a committee, and we said, okay, write the evaluation format that on how you would like your managers to evaluate you. You write the questions, and we will adapt those questions, and then be aware of those, and then that's how we'll evaluate you at the end of the year. It was really pretty eye-opening because they may have reworded the questions, but all the elements were still the same. They wanted to be evaluated with what was developed the first time around. And so that's number one. Second thing I found out in my career too is that, in order for evaluations to really be meaningful, you have to respect the person that's giving you the evaluation. If you do not respect that person, then they can just be jabbering at you, and it means nothing. It goes in one ear and out the other. It says if they truly respect you, then they're going to listen to you and see how they can really make improvements for the following year.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. We talked in our last session about how important it is for retention to have that really good bond between the employee and their supervisor, right? Because that's ultimately part of the reason that they would stay, is that they feel trusted, they feel valued, and that they're getting what they need to grow. So thank you all for sharing that. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of what we do in the Minnesota Judicial Branch. And so we use the BARS example where it's behavioral anchors. And so we have 5 core competencies that explain what the job is and what it should look like, right? So we have individual contributors who have 5 competencies. We have supervisors and managers who have 5 different competencies. Some are overlap, some are different, leading teams, leading change, performance management. But then we also have a director level and a referee level as well, since we have referees in our court. And then excluding the judges from this process. But we have different levels of competencies that we want to see these roles perform in. Underneath that are the behavioral anchors, right? So they are, I'll just show you here because we'll kind of go over this. They are the one-on-one pieces that actually explain what that looks like. So the competency is what you need to do, and the behavioral anchors are what it looks like. So one of your handouts should look like that, what's up there on the screen. So you can kind of see, we have a 3-point rating system that goes in conjunction with the competencies and the behavioral anchors. So it describes what it would look like to require improvement in that bucket, what it would be successful in that bucket, and what it would look like to exceed expectations in that bucket. So this is how we kind of use this to keep consistent language in our evaluation process so that everybody's getting rated for the same behaviors. So it's kind of like the gentleman said, where it's, they polled their employees and the employees were still in the same themes, but maybe rewording it. That's what we're asking supervisors to do on this, is take these behavioral anchors, put them into a paragraph format, right? Like, here is what it looks like to do that. Put it in your own words, use examples, use peer feedback, right? So this is what they do. Right up here, here are examples of how they do that and how they've done it over the year. And here's also things that are validated by the peer review or by their peers or other people that worked on projects with them, et cetera, et cetera. So this is how we use that example. And so wanted to make sure that we saw that, give you an example of kind of what that looks like so that everybody has the same, we kind of start at that same point, right? You take that, try to take those biases out of it and really look at what are those behaviors. And that leads us into the next section where we're going to talk about that.
So one of the reasons we went to this type of model was understanding first that there was bias. If you have blood in you, you have bias, right? This is who we all are. The person this morning talked about, you have a bias against dangerous things. That's a good thing that you should have in your head. But then we also have other biases from learned behaviors, the reel in the back of our head that plays movies that we've already seen, all of those things. So one of the reasons we went to a behavioral anchor model is because it can help reduce biases. I'm going to talk through some of the biases we see as HR professionals. These are biases that can be both in performance management, recruiting, succession planning, all of these things. These are biases that people have towards other people, but also in the employment realm. So we're going to talk about the common biases when completing performance reviews and then how to mitigate these biases. We know that in organizations, there can be a disparate impact on folks of color, our BIPOC individuals, through performance reviews. We know there can be a disparate impact on different genders or different GLBT status, all through research that has disaggregated data. So how do we, as an organization, start mitigating the bias when we know that if we have blood in our veins, we have bias? So leniency bias, I'm going to run through these and then talk about how a system can mitigate these. A leniency bias is you just go easy on somebody, right? I don't really want to have that needs improvement discussion, so everybody is above average, or everybody's average, that's good too. So having that leniency bias of, I'm just going to get everybody a 3 out of a 5-point scale because nobody argues with it, it's good enough. Or I'm going to give everybody a 4 in a 5-point scale because they're not really a 5, but they're not really a 3. Anybody use a 5-point rating scale? It's pretty common. 5-point rating scale, we chose to go with a 3-point, specifically to remove some of that leniency bias. It's easy to pick a 4. They're not really a 5. 3 is kind of like they're failing. Nobody gives anybody a 1 or 2 unless you're about to fire them, right? So having a 3-point scale can help really narrow where we truly are. There's a lot of research on 5-point or 3-point scale. Either is legitimate in any organization. But looking at how do we get rid of that leniency bias if that is something that you're seeing in your organization. Central tendency. This is, we have an annual review process that's all at the same time. So, managers who have tons of employees can fall victim to this. This is, I'm gonna check the box, and everybody's doing a pretty good job, so almost every single review says the same thing. So getting rid of that central tendency bias can be really important, because otherwise you have performers that need coaching or some that are exceeding, yet you've ranked them all the same. Recency bias. Remember what people did last week, good or bad, and rank it on that. Oh, they did an awesome presentation 3 weeks ago. There exceeds. Or remember when they've been late to work 2 months ago? They've been on time all the other time, but that's what's recently in my mind. So removing the recency by looking at the whole. Halo horn anchors bias. We look at one piece of information and we tie it to the person. So maybe they're really good at attention to detail. All of their stuff is spot on, you never have to correct it, and they're a supervisor. That's one thing they do, but how are they on performance management? How are they on coaching? How are they on this? But we're gonna say they're amazing because you never have to correct any of their reports they give you. So looking at the halo bias, you pick one thing that they're really good at, or on the flip side, you know, they've made a lot of mistakes recently. They don't have attention to detail, but how are they on all the other things? You just pick one thing and attach it to their whole, which is why we have the 5 competencies, so you can look at a variety of things. Compare contrast bias. Is this employee ranked against others? Am I giving them a forced bell curve? No, they should be ranked on the tasks they should be doing, not Susie's better than Janie. Look at, you know, Mohammed's job description and decide, how's Mohammed doing in his anchors, not how is he doing against someone else. Similarity bias. When we look at similarity bias, in our organization, in our leadership, we have a lot of people like me. And when I say people like me, I mean middle-aged white females. What that does is it creates a bias towards other middle-aged white females. This is something that's natural to us. We have to work against a natural tendency for similarity bias. And we might need to remove some things and really add in that list of things we're looking at, rather than people like me must be good. And that's hard to say out loud, right? Of course I don't do that, I would never. But when you strip away everything and you look at some of the research, people give people like them better scores. Oh, I would never. Then let's develop a process that can remove that type of bias, or at least try to mitigate. Probably can never remove that, but how do we mitigate that? So I want you to get in your groups again, a quick discussion about biases. Have you talked about biases in your performance management system? Have you seen any biases? Have this sparked your interest in saying, I wonder if we have some of these biases? So talk pretty briefly about different ways biases have shown up, or now that you're thinking about bias in your performance review. Going to move on from that, but hopefully it was helpful for you to think about removing those biases. Or if you've even thought about the biases in the annual review process. I'm going to go over a couple ways, besides the behavioral anchors that we're going to dig into, to mitigate that bias. So the first is rewrite and reread what you've written. Now that we've just gone through the biases, we have a recency bias for biases. So if we read about biases and then go back and read what we've written about our employees, we then recognize bias more. It can be as simple as that. Oh, I've only talked about things that this employee had done in the last month. I need to go back, look at my calendar, look at their calendar, see things from the previous year if I'm on an annual model, and go back and really think about that. So just reading a list of biases and then rereading your reviews is a great way to mitigate the bias. Another is make decisions based on assumptions, or not on assumptions. Somebody talked about 360 evals. This is a great way to put it in. If you're not using a full 360 model, you can use feedback questions. They can be anonymous through a variety of systems, and give that feedback to the individual. It gets you a well-rounded picture. You're not always able to see day to day, so sometimes we think about what they're doing and don't get a full picture. So we want to mitigate bias. We need to get down to what we personally have seen or observed and what others have. So we're not taking our own lens on it, but what are others taking their lens? So regular documentation. I stink at this one. I'm gonna own this. I have a real hard time taking notes in my one-to-ones. Like, I love to hear about people's stories, and I'm not, and I never take notes. And this one bites me every year. So I try quarterly to write a few things down so that if I can't do it in every single one-to-one, which is a best practice, I've got the yearly, quarterly reminders. I do something called a quarterly check-in where I ask some specific questions and take notes on those things, because I know my every other week one-to-ones are gonna be gabbing, talking, where are we going, what are we doing with all of our projects, and I'm not going to take notes. So I have to force myself to do this one, but I'm so much better off even if I do it quarterly. So documenting feedback. I have a little folder for all of my employees called brag. And if I get an email where somebody says something great about them or I've complimented them, I just drag it into the brag file for the person. And I tell them to send me brag emails. I know we're Minnesotan and we don't like to talk about ourselves, but I have them do that, and then I've got a brag folder at the end of the year too. Be consistent throughout the performance management process. Is someone, and if they are late, are you treating them different if someone else is late? Is one of your managers or supervisors treating people different if they're late? Why? Talking about that consistency. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this handout. How do we use this? We only have 2 of our competencies on this handout. And this is for our individual contributor. You'll see individual contributor. This is frontline staff. They're not supervising anybody. They're not, if you don't have this, there are extras up front. They're hard to read if you don't. So this helps an employee rating be objective. So after you've collected the data, you've looked at your forms, you've done, you looked at your email brag folder, you've done all those good things to mitigate bias, you take that and you think about your employee, and I'm gonna start with, which one's up there? Customer service. And I'm going to read these lines, and I'm gonna circle, after getting all that feedback, where objectively do they lie? We've got a list of behaviors that we want to see and ones that we don't want to see. And we can objectively match this to all the information we've gathered for an employee. This helps an efficient process for our supervisors who want, hey, can you just check the box? You really have to think about it, but we're giving them a guide on how to look at their employees in this way. It also helps them write their performance evals, so they've got some language that they can start using. It is not subjective. So we provide an employee a rating that accurately reflects. In order to be a 1, or a 1, 2, or 3, 3 is our exceeds category, you don't have to have everything in this exceeds. And if you have 1 and requires improvement, it doesn't mean you go to requires improvement. You look at the totality of the circumstance. So it's also a great resource when you hire an employee to help them say, here's what we expect. It's also a great tool to use as you're mentoring an employee with skills to say, here's where we're at, here's what we want you to be at for exceeding. So it can be a great tool not only for performance management, but can be a tool to use in all of those ways to have an objective way to explain, what is customer service? I don't know, you're good with the customers. Here's what it should look like. So we look at their whole year and look at all of the different things that make up their year and give them a ranking based on where they fit in our performance evaluations. We have another piece. Not only do we do that for our employees, we then get together as managers and talk about it, including names, which got a little hard at first, but now we're good with it. We talk about and we calibrate, should this person be successful based on what I've told you, to make sure it's an objective and fair process. I'm going to turn over calibration to Rob, and then we'll get an opportunity to calibrate together.
Yeah, so thanks, Dana. We're going to talk about this a little bit so that we understand what it is and why we do it. And then we're going to give you an opportunity to do it in that group that you tried or that you did with this morning. So what is calibration? It's a facilitated process, right? Where you get to talk about and measure what do those behaviors look like and where do they fit and how do they fit consistently across your organization, right? So if you're thinking about this slide that you just looked at up here, so if you're doing, when we did this for the first time, of course, like we're doing this individually, like Dana talked about. So we're not comparing people to people, but we also weren't comparing expectations of this division to expectations of this division or county to county, right? So for us, it was a little bit harder to figure out what do these look like? And so is a lead worker consistently doing things in one division to another that would exceed expectations? Or any roles of those trying to do those same things and hold them consistent. So a calibration is really a group of leaders that get together to really talk about those things more in depth, right? Which is what you're going to do. So you're going to read a paragraph of somebody who wrote an evaluation and really dig into it, right? Are they using language that screams exceeds expectations, but it's light on the examples? Like, what does this really mean? You're not explaining it very well. If you pulled this evaluation out of somebody's file because they're applying for the next level and you're reading it, are you going to say this makes sense to me? I know exactly what this person does and how they exceed expectations because of these behavioral anchors or not? So that's really what we tried to do, was get together as leadership and talk about some of those things. So if, like, for example, if I rated my person exceeds expectations and then Dana has the same exact job and she ranked her person as a successful and we look at it and it's the same exact job, same exact work that they're doing, but I'm escalating it. I'm either using some sort of bias or I'm saying, oh, well, Dana, in my district, doing that exceeds expectation, right? And Dana's like, well, but that's the job. That's what they're supposed to be doing. So how do they exceed expectations for doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And that's how we really calibrate these things and take some of those biases out of the process as well. So we are going to get into a mock calibration activity. So we want you to get back into the groups or whoever you're comfortable getting together with, because we are going to take, let's see, which one are we doing first? We are going to take teamwork and collaboration first. So you should have a sheet that has some paragraphs on it. If you don't, we have some more, so we can get those out to you. And then you do have the behavioral anchor and competency sheet. So front side and back side, one's customer service, and the other side is customer stakeholder focus. And calibration and teamwork. So, what we want you to do, read the paragraph of the rating, compare it to the behavioral anchors, and talk about it in your group. What rating would you give what you're reading and why? So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to complete that, and then we're going to get together, come back, and debrief the situation. Do we have a group that would volunteer to talk about what they discussed? And really try to answer these two questions here at the bottom. So what specifically led to the rating that you gave, and what additional information would have been helpful?
Well, Anthony seems to do a lot of things really well. Our big question is, what is he supposed to be doing? Does he supervise somebody that should be doing these things, and he's just taken over?
That's a great point, right? Like when you start to look at them and it doesn't provide you enough detail and it's very vague, it's hard to tell what it would be.
We're assuming Anthony's an individual contributor. So that's what the rankings we've given him on the individual contributor. But often we don't have enough information. And that's why calibration and talking to each other about it is really good when we bring actual examples to other managers in the same division, or maybe a few across. If you have one in each courthouse, all the courthouse get on Zoom and talk about it. It really can help answer some of those questions if you didn't know. It's great.
Did you also talk about what rating you would give him?
He was successful to exceed expectations.
Okay, so it's in between successful and exceeds. Okay, great. Who else would like to talk about what they discussed? Okay, yeah, right here behind you in the blue.
We basically came up with the same rating, really more the successful rating. A couple of reasons for that. We found a couple of the areas we didn't have examples to demonstrate where he was at with that, whether he was even successful at all. He may not have even been on that scale. And those areas were giving positive feedback to the team, receiving constructive feedback positively, and then the other area was engaging in constructive conflict to handle disagreements effectively. We didn't know how he may have managed through those things. And again, the piece of not knowing specifically what his job requirements were, is he really just meeting those particulars, or is he exceeding? So we gave him a successful overall.
Absolutely.
Which successful is good, right? It's doing your job. And we've had to reframe that in our organization, that everybody can't exceed all the time. So successful, if he's doing the things, that is good. And sometimes you might lean over to exceed. All right, in this competency, they're definitely exceeding. They're the one teaching others about it. And you have those examples. And why calibration is a little bit of that magic is because the person who wrote it is being vulnerable at that moment, but they're learning from their peers to say, I think you missed this. Oh my gosh, I should put that example in, thank you. For someone like me, who is a late starter on evaluations, these calibration sessions take a different meaning. I start thinking about things I should write about people, and I start jotting down notes, right? So they're really good in that vulnerability as a supervisor and manager, and sharing what you wrote and having other people say, well, what about this? Oh, that's helpful. Thank you. Now I have a more meaningful evaluation for someone.
One of the things that I kind of zoomed in on is Anthony does seem to be a really good team player. I was just saying, one of the things I zoomed in on is Anthony does seem to be a really good team player in helping other people when needed. But the last couple of sentences in this paragraph made me kind of wonder, because it says that one of his responsibilities was updating the county court's website regarding the building closures during the pandemic. But then at the very bottom, it says that he does update the websites accordingly over several months' times. So with that sort of information, that should be more up to date with what's actually going on. So I kind of wonder why it's taking so long, and why he's not focusing on that rather than helping other staff.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is part of the process that we also do. So we do a calibration session with peers. So it might be a group of supervisors, but we also have built into our system that it calibrates with the next level supervisor first, right? And so these are things that we hope that next level points out of, hey, you're not addressing all of the behavioral anchors, right? And so are there pieces that are in there, or identifying these things that you were talking about, right? It's like, this doesn't make sense to us, like it doesn't read right, like we need more explanation of what that looks like, because it could be that he updated it for several months when it wasn't his job. It could have been he updated it over several months and it was really slow. It could mean a lot of different things. And so we try to have multiple layers of that calibration as well. Make sure that you have a comment as well.
Yeah, I never did a microphone.
It's mostly for the people online.
Oh, okay. It appears to me like Anthony's kind of a typical employee where each employee has like multiple tasks that they need to get done. And Anthony's good at a few of these tasks and really enjoys doing them and puts a lot of effort and does a bang-up job in this coordination of this interpreters and everything else. And then he has some jobs that updating websites and everything that he doesn't really enjoy. He gets them done, but it's done on, it meets the bare minimum. So he's succeeding at a lot of things, but then again, he's barely meeting other aspects. For that is that's what our job is, we can see that he does very well in certain areas, and it's really our job to help him out and refine those skills and really emphasize the importance of the other elements of his job.
Yeah, absolutely. Really like that. All right.
We have time for one more calibration activity. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
We're going to go to the next one. You also have the competency of customer stakeholder focus. So to get those synapses firing and staying there, we're going to have you practice one more time, and then we'll come back. Usually our calibration sessions are an hour to an hour and a half, where we go through with groups of supervisors, sometimes small groups, sometimes large groups. So we'll do one more quick one and turn it over to Navi.
So again, we're going to kind of go through the same things. Would a couple of different groups like to share these two questions again? So what determination of a rating did you come out with here, and why? All right, thank you.
I think we would rate Navi at exceeds expectations, with the caveat that we want more information about why explicitly do you think that this person is, proactive and really great at what she does, and, exceeds expectations, always is looking to improve. Like, there's no examples, but all the buzzwords are there.
Right.
To where I am tempted to side with the supervisor with the caveat that I just need more information. I don't know who this person is.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, examples paint 1,000 words, right? I mean, they're worth gold in these types of evaluations, because it really shows that the supervisor or the rater and the evaluator knows what these look like in a role. Absolutely. Thank you. Another group that would like to share? All right, up here in the front.
Thank you. I think we basically said the same thing, that if we look at the chart and what those expectations would be, we would say Navi exceeds expectations. However, the supervisor we would rate more as the maybe successful, because it wasn't written to the details. We really expressed how some jurisdictions will require all of the details on a regular basis, and that's how you have the justification, especially if it's a merit-based increase. But again, she met all the markers, but on an HR level or a court administrator level, we would definitely want a tremendous amount of additional information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you can all see as you work through this, right? Like, within this type of system, it's important to be able to benchmark some of those examples and different things as you have one-to-ones, or as the supervisor meets with that employee, so that you can add these things to it. there isn't a science. This is definitely more of an art. There's no like correct answer that we can give you today, but you can see by going through this process that you're going to eventually get better and better and better at writing these because you're consistently talking about them. You're consistently rating them the same. You're moving towards that consistency of what these behaviors look like. So whichever system you are using, this is just a way to help you consistently talk about it, rate those things, have the jobs perform the same way. Get those biases out, as far as reducing them as far as you can. Because of course, with biases, it's knowing that you have them or knowing that it's out there is half the battle. So we're gonna turn to Dana here to wrap up the session, and here we go.
I want to talk a little bit on the debrief. We do have a merit-based system, so it does help. And we also are a represented environment with 3 different unions. So this type of performance management does help in situations like that. We have behavioral anchors. Obviously, personnel files we don't share, but we do have behavioral anchors that we can share so they know what the expectations of employees are, which is really helpful with that transparency with our represented population as well. And it helps both the supervisor, so maybe the person that wrote that last one about Navi was a new supervisor, meeting with their manager, saying, hey, why don't you add some more details? Tell me more about it. And you've got a great way to coach in an easy way, or meeting with colleagues who share their wisdom about how they write performance reviews. So from where we go from here, we talked about the overview of a performance evaluation program. We talked a lot about biases, and then we shared our way. Our way is not the only way to do performance evaluations. Maybe you want to take something back from what we did to introduce into your courts, or maybe next year you want to present, or midyear's in Minneapolis, come and talk about your performance management. Because I think, as we talked about in the beginning, there was many different types of performance management, and how do we get it so it's meaningful, effective, efficient, and people don't dread it, and people are able to really exceed at the process of performance management. If you have any questions, Rob and I are here. Otherwise, it is sunny. I can see right out there. Go enjoy. I'm originally from Wausau, Wisconsin, so yay, I'm a Scotty at heart. Go enjoy a brat, get some sauerkraut on it, get a beer. It's all good. All right. If you have any questions, we're here. Thanks.